Welcome back to Automate Live. It's bittersweet to tell you, but this is going to be our last Automate Live, unless something happens for the show. It's been great. I've had some really fascinating conversations, and these conversations are going to stay online for posterity as well. If you missed anything, I want to go back and watch. One of the most exciting things, our little booth is over there, and the entire week I was sitting there with a very large blank check. We had the startup competition. I'm coming from startup land myself, so it's really great, and it was such an incredible selection of companies. Going through yesterday and talking to everybody, I'm very impressed. But you were Brennand Pierce and Kinisi Robotics. You were the cream of the top of the cream.
Why, thank you, Brian. Yes. It's great to win, especially when I watched everyone else's pitches. There were so many great companies there being represented.
You were like, there's no way.
It was like, there was a couple of companies that I'm like, surely they have it because they had such great products. And it's just great to be selected.
Yeah, you and I were talking yesterday, and we were talking about a lot of the kind of like macro trends that I've been talking to people about. Humanoids, obviously, everybody's talking about it. And one of the trends that I've been noticing, and I think this does apply to you, is that everybody rushed into legs, right? There was a lot of money going in, so everyone went full stack. And now there's been, I don't want to say regression, but now people are realizing, maybe there is kind of a nice, there's a place that exists between AMRs and humanoids. And you're kind of right in there.
Yeah, so I should also say I spent 10 years doing a PhD in humanoid robotics, speciality in legs. I love humanoids. I really wanted to build a humanoid robot at one point in my life. But when I look at the problems we're trying to solve, it's very much still in the early stages of how do you actually take an AI model from the labs and actually take it to the real world. And from my opinion of starting multiple companies, it's like, why overcomplicate it? Most of the tasks we're looking at is, can you drive to a box? Can you drive to a part in an assembly line? Can you pick it up? Can you slot it into a racking? Can you put it onto a pallet? Most of the places we've gone and visited, they're flat floors. Why have legs? Why overcomplicate it? Especially when it's so hard to bring new technology to customers. Why overcomplicate your startup? Because it's hard enough as it is.
Yeah, that said, it is companies like you that are overcomplicating the definition of humanoid right now. You're obviously kind of testing the edges, but I do appreciate that. I obviously understand the benefits of being shaped and being the same size as a person, but it's really interesting to see now how people are kind of supporting or exploring the outer reaches of what can constitute a humanoid robot.
Yeah, I think where humanoids would probably be more what we say is like legged humanoids, if there's uneven ground, if you're outside, if it's got narrow spaces. But most of the pilots we're talking to, they're designed to have like sack trucks. They're designed already to have AMRs moving around. That's where, from my previous company, Bear Robotics, I've got 10 years experience of building AMRs. It also helps me personally, the fact that I can use the technology and the AMR from my previous company to build on top of. So I don't have to worry about, mapping the world, making a navigation stack, and these sorts of technology I can actually just use because it's a bit of a commodity now. So we also just combine cobot arms with an AMR base, so we can really as a company just focus on what we want to focus on now, which is actually, can we take the foundational model, i.e. can a human operator using VR train the robot to do a task, and not only train it, and I think this is the key from my experience is, you see academia, they're like, oh, this works 90% of the time.
Yeah.
A customer doesn't want that. They want 99.9%. Amazon doesn't care that their parcel goes out 90% of the time. They're like, it has to get delivered. And that's where I see the same technology wave that I did like 10, 15 years ago when you were bringing the new technology of SLAM out of academia into the warehouse. So you don't need strips. And there it took my previous company is now 8 years old. We still have 200 engineers just working on old-fashioned control system and slabs. So it takes a long time to take something that works in a lab and make sure that you can just press a button and it works 24/7. And that's why we're trying to concentrate on just like one slice of that, which is, can we get an AI model to pick up an object, put a label on it, and put it on a conveyor belt?
Yeah, it is interesting because it is a direct evolution from Bear. So the wheeled base is essentially a Bear.
It is actually a Bear base.
It's actually so that's the next challenge, right? You kind of, to a certain extent, were able to conquer the bottom, and now it's all about the top.
Exactly. So using Bear's API, we can set the robot, go to this place, go to that place. We can use their mapping app and all of this. So when the robot gets to, let's say, a pallet, our system can then just concentrate on using reinforcement learning for the long horizon task of actually making the pallet or taking the pallet, or then we can use what we call imitation learning, where a human operator can actually control the robot to pick up boxes. One of the hardest challenges we're trying to do as well is how to put a label on a box in the correct place, and that's what we're trying to train our robot to do ourselves.
I mean, the biggest, as somebody who covers universities and early stage startups, to me, the thing that is changing the game and like continually changing the game is how we train the robots themselves. So, you mentioned two of the primary styles, but it's evolving so quickly. You have to be nimble when it comes to like what the future is going to look like and how quickly these can actually be trained to be deployed.
I know, and being a CEO and being in robotics for 20 years, it's incredibly hard even for myself to keep up. That's why I went out and hired the best people I could find. And even there, some of our AI engineers that say have been doing this for 4 or 5 years, you get people from academia. One of our staff literally graduated with his PhD today, comes into our team as like, this is the new cutting edge, which then supersedes work that's like 3 years old. That's like, this is old, this is new. You no longer need like 200-300 demonstrations. You can even do one-shot learning for some of these tasks where you can literally just take one example and then using the power of AI again, you can actually take that one example and make thousands of synthetic data from that one example to train your model.
Yeah, that was a big thing in the NVIDIA keynote is both synthetic data. I mean, the executive who gave the talk was saying, I haven't heard it put this way, but that like at the end of the day, actual real human training will amount to about 1% of the actual data on these robots.
Yeah, so at the moment, for example, we would record a couple of videos using actual computer vision. You could say, this is the robot, this is the box. And then it will mask out those, and then you can actually put in, by using these quite cool like dolly models, you can actually then put different warehouses, different textures. You can even put different textures on the box, and you can even make the box slightly larger, slightly smaller, and then put that into your training set. So now you don't need hundreds of or even thousands of hours of human example. You can get like an hour's worth of example of picking up boxes or putting a label on it, and then create all this synthetic data to make the models more robust.
I'm always curious what the pipeline is, from going from seeing a new technology in the research space. Obviously, there's a lot of them that will build companies around it. But do you work with the technologies? Do you work with it's been a very long week. Do you work with the universities in terms of like recruiting or new technologies?
We don't work at the moment because we're just too small, only a 26-people team. We don't work with the university, but I do go to a lot of conferences to try and steal the best and the brightest.
You stand outside the school?
We went, like in January, we went to the number one conference in England called Manipulate, if I correctly, and that had all the PhDs there who actually do imitation learning. We talked to hundreds of PhD students and managed to persuade 3 of them to come and join us for this crazy ride. Some of them were postdocs, made them quit university to come and join us. And, the other one that graduated today, we're like, we'll give you a job offer now. Come and join us in 4 months' time when you graduate.
Yeah. So you started with, I was actually speaking with some folks from Bear. They're here as well the other day. And I commented on the fact that like, you kind of picked I don't want to say it's the most chaotic environment because in a lot of ways it's strange. Like restaurants are strange because they are structured to a certain extent, but they are, when it comes to the human element, incredibly chaotic.
So this is, unfortunately, you're 100% true. When we first started out in my previous company, which was actually just a waiter book taking food from the kitchen to the table, within about 3 or 4 weeks, we actually had a working prototype that was working in the real world. And we're like, this is easy. And then you got to the reality of, when a restaurant's busy, they'll put tables together. There'll be 20 people around at one table. And then you're like, but this is my waypoint. And now there's a table in the way. So then you start getting in the complexity of the real deployment. And I think this is one thing I've learned, luckily, unluckily, over the last 20 years. It's very easy to make something work for a pilot or for a demo, but then when you go and start expanding, all these customers just want something slightly different. You know, all the environments are different, the tasks are slightly different. And if you're not careful, you either become an integrator, where you're now having to manage hundreds of people going out and do these customs installations, or you end up with a code base that has so many flags or so many different variations to handle all this complexity in the real world.
That's interesting, actually. It's just occurred to me, and now it's very obvious that the companies that would be ordering a Bear robot, or the restaurants that would be ordering a Bear robot are the most chaotic. They're the ones who need the help the most.
Yeah, and lesson learned, but in a way it was good for us because it made it harder for other entries. So this is how we got investment with SoftBank as other companies. They went out, they actually bought without us knowing our robot, our competitors. And when they actually put it into the field, they realized we've solved a lot of these hard challenges that other companies were just ignoring.
So early on when you got in, let me step back actually. Was it always restaurants for Bear?
So the backstory is John, my co-founder, actually owned a restaurant. He was a Googler. I don't know if he doesn't mind saying this. He thought he'd buy a restaurant because it'd be a nice place to hang out there with his friends.
Sure.
About 6 months in, he realized it was very hard, managing a lot of staff, very chaotic. That's where he personally came up with the idea of a robot to help him. And that's when I actually met him, when he was like, let's build a robot to solve this problem that he personally had in the restaurant.
I asked because I'm wondering in those early days whether the kind of long-term, maybe it still is, you're not there in the same capacity, but whether the long-term goal was always to diversify into other verticals.
Great question. This is one thing, to be honest, we struggled with. Are we a restaurant company, or are we a robot company? Yeah. So this actually had some implication of what we were going to do. So we always go to Robot Restaurant Association conference, which is massive. And we were like, if we are a restaurant company, does it make sense to us to go and buy a point of sales company and then integrate that? Do we then go into the back of house with a flippy style robot? Do we go and put AI in the back of house? That, or are we a robot company where we should go into different verticals, warehouses, hospitality, hospitals, care homes? In the end, we decided we're a robot company just for the simple fact we realized our core competence and our skill set was making the world's best navigation.
So, okay, we've only got a minute left right now, but I'm still going to ask you a big question. So you leave in a certain capacity, you leave Bear and you start this company. It just wasn't Kinisi or this robot that we're seeing wasn't something that made sense within the broader context of Bear.
Yeah, it probably makes more sense now, but at the time then, they were expanding out to different verticals at AMR. They have their carty downstairs, which is the warehouse. They were going out into hotels. They were expanding there. And at the time, it just didn't make sense for them, just for the capacity to go and do this. But I actually started this company in their headquarters. Jokingly, people said I was treating it as a WeWork. So, that's why I built it with the base. And we do actually have incredibly good ties.
Well, congratulations. Thank you so much. I think I might see you in London in a couple of weeks. I don't know
Definitely,
if you might be at a
Humanoids.
certain robotics event out there. So it was a pleasure, and I guess we'll speak soon in a very different time zone.
Definitely. Thanks so very much for having me.